Hi, I'm Kenneth Tu, and I'm in conversation today with Julia Anderson. Julia, how about you give an intro about yourself and what you're up to these days?
Sure. Hi, I'm Julia. I am a UX designer living in Los Angeles. I currently work with conversational AI technology, currently at Bixby, which is Samsung's digital assistant. And I work with the design, the writing, and the interaction flows of Bixby across different devices, whether that's phone, watch, TV, or smart home devices.
And to follow up on this, when you first started working on Bixby, I imagine the environment was a little different for AI than it is now, at least in terms of excitement. Is there anything that you've observed that's kind of changed from the time you started to what's kind of happening now?
Yeah, great question. So I've been at Bixby for a little over 2 years now. And when I first started, as I think a lot of companies have done and maybe continue to do, is that Samsung has their own models and their own ways of powering Bixby. I think a lot of other companies have their own algorithms, their own training models. And up until recently, that was how things worked. But now that we have the rise of large language models that can be tailored and maybe adjoined to existing technologies, there's a lot of talk of all these different companies going about and making their own models more powerful, more personalized. So I think the initiatives and the ideas are still the same. Every one of these digital and voice assistants like Bixby and similarly Alexa, Google Assistant, all those, they all want to be the most helpful, powerful, best user experience assistant. But now with the rise of generative technologies, large language models, it becomes a lot easier to do that if you have the right technology. So it's all about integrating that and making sure it works with whatever already exists.
And from what I understand, you've been focused mostly on the voice side. Um, Given the nature of the growth with LLMs, obviously that started off initially primarily as a text-based interface. Has there been anything that you've learned from more of the tech side that you're trying to integrate as ideas on how you're approaching voice? And why do you think the text-based modality has taken off a little more than the voice, even though voice seems to be the primary form factor up until like the past year or so?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess it's like text versus voice is kind of the question. So
Exactly.
got it. Yeah, I guess it's a tough one because chatbots have been around. I think longer than voice assistants because there'd been more research. It was easier to maybe learn about natural language technologies through text initially, and chatbots haven't really gone away. I think there was a dip in them when all these voice assistants started coming out, but they're back now more commonly. I think partially because ChatGPT and those technologies are making it easier for people who are like on our laptops to text and type and also get large relevant responses into their screen. So, and you can do that on your phone too. I think when it comes to what the best user experience is, it depends where the user is. Are you at home, on your desk? Are you in public? Do you want people hearing you search things? Do you have that? Um, do you have an interest in like talking to something more personalized, or are you just kind of using it as drafting a letter or something? I think it depends what people can and know how to use these AI assistants or technologies for. So I think in order for voice to, I don't want to say make a comeback, but to be at the same level, I think people need to acknowledge that users are not like always just talking to these AI assistants. They're also texting. Now there's visuals and videos even. So they all have to work together. Otherwise, it's going to be very disjointed, and maybe people won't even end up using certain things because of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about the environmental factors where if you're in an office or something, using voice as a modality might have some disadvantages as opposed to, just typing something in. And, maybe on the consumer side, it's more convenient to use voice if you're like at home or something and you're less self-conscious.
Yeah, exactly. It's self-conscious, and then sometimes the voice might not, depending on, let's say your question is like very detailed, takes maybe 30 seconds to say out loud. There's no guarantee with the current technology that it would necessarily capture all of that correctly and be able to respond to you in a way that would also take like 30 seconds. It could, if any one of you have used any of these large language models where you type, a lot of the responses tend to be really long.
Yeah, unless
And
you give it a limitation. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And otherwise you'd have to specify in the prompt, like, give it to me in 100 words or less. But sometimes, now you can even do images, right? So you're not going to hear an image. Maybe if there's a video, you would hear the audio, but you would still want to look. So I think that's like a whole interaction design problem that people are still figuring out.
Sure. And in the next 2 minutes or so, or maybe a minute, are there any problems or things that you're excited to work on in the industry overall, or maybe in a different industry as a problem?
Yeah. Gosh, there's a lot of potential and problems right now. I'd say the biggest problems are, I guess I've already gone into, maybe there's a lot of things that could be better with certain user experience when it comes to multimodal, meaning like if you have text and voice and image, like how does that all string together? I think that's just kind of an overarching problem that will always be needed to solve when it comes to new technologies. But when it comes to something a little bit more high level, there's something that's really interesting to me and possibly worrying too, depending on the industry, is how AI is, one, gathering data, but also how are they training it? Are they doing it ethically? Is it in a way that is actually helping a company's strategy, or is it just a little extra thing that because everyone else has it, people need it too? Like you just need to catch up. So it's more basically responsible AI. I think if I could summarize, what the problem is that I would like to help solve is how do we make responsible decisions around AI as companies and as users? Like, are we aware of how it all works? Even if we are not, are we able to incorporate it in our tools and workflows in a way that doesn't devalue creativity, doesn't exploit anyone's data? So I think that's just like a big problem that is facing the industry. I don't think it's unique to AI, but it has become more prevalent because of just like this massive amounts of data and usage we're experiencing.
Got it. And this is going to wrap up our initial conversation on, the technology and what you've been doing on the work side. Five for, I guess, our people that might be watching this on LinkedIn or something, and we'll kind of continue to the second portion. So something I've been really interested in is, how other people kind of stay organized, and how they plan. Just because this isn't naturally one of my intrinsic, kind of strengths. How do you go about, like, planning and organizing at a high level, like your day or your week?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a loaded question, but I'll try to answer it like high level. So, okay, I'll start with, so I currently work remotely, and in order to stay on track, I need to build some structure around my day. So, just so I don't get distracted, like I'm sure everyone, even at some point, has been remote, I would imagine, unless you're even essential workers, I don't know. But when you're in your home and there's so many distractions, it's hard to focus. So I think the number one thing I've learned and try to enforce is to remove as many distractions as possible. That just high level, do not disturb on your phone. Don't be near somewhere that needs other attention, whether that's like your dog or a friend or a chore. I think like those two things alone will just save your time without you even realizing. So that's like high level. I think on a more practical day-to-day detail, uh, advice would be I love using like to-do lists. I know some people might find them overwhelming. I use Notion as a planning for apps as an app. If you want a recommendation, love Notion. You can integrate it with a bunch of other tools. You can use it to create to-do lists. You can use it as like for pretty much anything organization. But for the most part, we'll start my day with my to-do list that either I make the night before or the morning of. Try to stick to it. I think it's way easier said than done, but something that you and I kind of had been just talking about is context switching, like trying to make sure that you're doing similar tasks at the same time. Like you shouldn't be going from a meeting to writing for an hour to doing administrative tasks to another meeting. It just makes your brain like switch all these different roles. So if possible, if you can, like try to group similar activities together, like have those meetings all in like 2 hours and then have like a block for writing for an hour, do administrative tasks like in a separate time. And that I think that in general is good for your brain.
Yeah, that's really helpful. One question I have is you mentioned kind of to-do lists earlier, and you use Notion. I'm just curious, what did you use before Notion? And on Notion yourself for your to-do list, how long do they get? Like, what's the range of the size of your daily list?
Yeah, I think so. I actually, before Notion, I used Google Docs a lot as kind of a place to like write down whether it's for something like a project outline, to-do lists, calendar apps, stuff like that. Now I feel like I do almost all of that minus the calendar stuff on Notion, but I actually still do my to-do lists per day by hand. The reason I do that is in my kind of rule to myself is if I have here, I'll show you. If I have more things that fit into past a sticky note, then there's something that I'm not prioritizing well. Like basically all my items that I like really have to do today need to fit in a sticky note, or else I'm like over complicating things or not prioritizing correctly. So that's like my little life hack for that works for me. And like gives me a visual indicator of like how much I actually have to do that day.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never talked to anyone that uses sticky notes as opposed to like more of a journal format when they do actually do writing. But the constraint idea is good for prioritization, I think.
Right. Yeah, it's really because I think that's the one thing I've always struggled with. It's like, you could make a to-do item for every like 15 minutes of your day if you really wanted to stay organized, but that could also drive you crazy. So I'd like to just keep it pretty high level. Like, okay, I need a couple of things done this morning, a couple of things done later this afternoon. And like it becomes more manageable because it looks more manageable. And then you do get the satisfaction of like you're crossing it out physically. So that's what works for me.
For your to-do list, do you just have like little bullet points and little like written descriptions? Do you use the same color like pen or something? Like what does it come out as?
Yeah, I feel like you could go even more in depth and like start to change up the colors. I just do it like with the same color. I don't I try when it comes to just the actual to-do list, I try to not overcomplicate it. Um, the I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, I also use a whiteboard. I guess I like to do more like my brainstorming and stuff like that, pen and paper or just like manually. And then Notion will be for like the deeper work or like the strategy, the writing itself. Like say I'm writing a blog post or something. What I would do is I would have my sticky note maybe for the day. I'd be like I don't know, like write 50% of blog posts. And then I would have my Notion page and I would that day hopefully like do that on the Notion page, but I wouldn't track stuff on Notion just because I prefer doing to-do lists by hand. I do know on Notion there's a lot of ways to track your progress, and I think that works really well for certain tasks too, because then you get to see like over time you're forming habits, right? I think that's what it's all about.
I don't have any other immediate questions. Is there any general advice for organization or planning that you have on your mind that you learned about that you haven't been able to express?
I think one of the most helpful tips that I've gotten when it comes to organization is that you can categorize every task into like 5 different categories. And I think this is more kind of tailored to if you think about tasks in a business sense. So this might work better for like a work setting rather than like a home to-do list. But so the 5, hopefully I remember these 5. So 5 would be like a design or creative task, administrative task, management or strategy, sales, and like general like communication. So I guess the difference between sales and communication would be like sales is more like external, communication would be more internal, like meetings. But I tried to like divide every task I have into one of those 5. So design, administrative, management, sales, communication, or something like along those lines. And it helps like me chunk everything together. So if I can, you asked if I change colors with my to-do list. If I were to do that, I would do it based on those 5. So I try to like chunk like administrative stuff maybe in like a corner, like really small, like to do like, oh, I need to like get my dry cleaning and like do the dishes. Like those are all like administrative. But the real like deep work would be like the design work or like the management strategy work. And that requires me to I cannot mix the two or else my brain will hurt. So stuff like that.
All right, thank you. This was very helpful. And
Cool.
bye to our guests.